welcome to Media Spectrum, where stories still matter. So today we're going to be doing an overview of the whole Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy. If you missed it, I spent the last few weeks reviewing each individual movie. I've got a whole playlist of them, so feel free to go back and check that out before you watch this one. This is going to be kind of just an overview on the whole series, and yeah, there will be full spoilers going ahead in this one. Now, overall, I still liked this trilogy quite a lot. I already knew that I loved the first movie. The second one held up a lot better than I thought it did, and while the third movie has more flaws for me to pick apart, it also does a lot of things right that I really like. And I'll definitely have a lot to say about the benefits and cons of the whole, what I'm calling the Marvelication of this as we go on. But overall, I like this trilogy quite a bit, although there definitely are some issues to pick apart. Now, first off, I will say, just if I'm going to kind of rank these movies, I would still say the first is definitely the best. It was just such an original and well-realized movie, and it's a little hard nowadays to appreciate just how unique it was at the time. Because after this had such a huge influence on the way Marvel did some of their movies, and of course James Gunn has gone on to be hugely influential in DC. And so this type of story where these like ragtag group of not A-list or even B-list, but like C and arguably D-list heroes come together and tell a really good story with lots of humor and a little bit of bite is something we see a lot more of these days. But back when this first came out, it was so fresh, and it still holds up really, really well. And it does a very good job of using a simple but effective story to give some very clear messages about the benefits of a chosen family coming together. Now, the second movie is a very typical sequel in many ways. It's largely more of the same. It's a little bit bigger, a little bit longer, has a couple more characters added to it. It's not quite as fresh, the jokes don't land as hard, but it still has a lot of charm. I think Kurt Russell is the best villain that this trilogy had to offer, but Kurt Russell is very charming and good in his role, and I really love Mantis. I really love what she added to the team, and I really love her chemistry with Drax in particular.
You feel love?
Yeah, I guess, I feel a general unselfish love for just about everybody.
No, sexual love.
No, I don't.
For her.
No.
I also appreciated seeing some of the more, what I'll call kind of outcast family members, some of the more villainous people who were still kind of family, like Nebula and Yondu, not only get further developed, but really turn into allies in this movie. I'm particularly pleasantly surprised that Yondu got what ended up being my favorite line in this whole series.
He may have been your father, boy, but he wasn't your daddy.
And I really appreciate on a thematic level what a good follow-up this is to the first movie. Whereas the first movie is all about the value of a chosen family, in this movie we see how your biological family can still be wildly dysfunctional and a chosen family can be even more valuable. And as I said in my original review, that is not just a really good message in general, but in this day and age where so many of us have more chosen families than necessarily our original biological families, it's a really timely message that I think hits well. Now, I am going to say I'll rank the third last, but that's not to say I hate the third movie. The third movie did a lot of things that I really, really like. It arguably has the highest highs of the series, but it also has some of the lowest lows. It has some of the biggest issues. One of the things I really don't like in this movie is that the whole chosen family theme that largely defined the first two movies, it's basically gone now. Like, yeah, there's still a family and they're all together and that's nice, but there's really nothing done with that. Instead, this has a lot more thematic ground it's trying to cover. It covers things like letting go of the past and things you cannot change, healing from trauma, the fallacy of trying to chase perfection, and even some animal welfare themes. And those are perfectly fine themes to explore a movie around, but it's definitely less focused than the first two were. And also, since the first two were largely connected to the same type of idea of a chosen family, this one, it feels a lot more disconnected from those first two movies. And not just because it's exploring different ideas, but also, as I mentioned in that review, the fact that there have been several movies in between Volume 2 and Volume 3 that involve the Guardians of the Galaxy, but weren't considered part of this trilogy. And so the result is that this definitely feels less connected than the first two did. But I will say this ending hit really, really hard for me. I really loved the choice to not just magically fix everything and have the family come back together. At this point, enough stuff had happened where the majority of the group realized, you know what, I gotta go off on my own for a while. And it's not because this became a toxic family dynamic or anything like that. It's just because sometimes in life you reach a point, especially if you've been through some stuff, where you just kind of need to put certain relationships on pause and go off and be a little selfish and focus on yourself to grow and heal as a person. That is a kind of complex, mature idea that I was not expecting this trilogy to reach. And I really appreciated the way they handled, sometimes you have to let go of a relationship, even a healthy one, in order to grow and be a better person in the long term. And it's so, so bittersweet watching these people go off in directions that are positive, but also watching the family kind of break up. Now, after watching this whole trilogy, surprisingly enough, the biggest consistent theme throughout all three movies is trauma, of all things, which is kind of surprising given that these movies are known largely as comedies, and they are very lighthearted and very silly in tone for the most part. And yeah, I mean, think about it. The very first scene of the first movie is an 8-year-old Peter watching his mother die on his deathbed after he refuses to hold her hand. That is some heavy, heavy, heavy shit. And then throughout the rest of the series, he watches his actual father dies, he watches his adoptive father dies, he watches his girlfriend die, and we see him turn to alcoholism. And again, it's not like the movie focuses on this, but it's happening consistently through the background with him. Then, of course, there's Rocket. I mean, the third movie dedicates about a third of its runtime, it feels like, to showing his whole backstory, showing the horrific torture he went through, and the fact that he literally got all his friends, his first chosen family. He wasn't trying to, he was trying to save them, but he inadvertently got them killed in the process. That is, for most of us, almost unfathomable trauma to be carrying around. There's Drax, who literally had his wife and daughter murdered. And then there's Gamora and Nebula, who both had very abusive relationships with their father, actually stepfather, but still effectively their father, Thanos. And what's interesting is their relationships with him are both bad, but in kind of different ways. And I think part of the reason why they do come back together over the course of the series is that trauma bond they have of going through that experience with him. Honestly, the only character in this group that doesn't seem to be dealing with some level of trauma is Groot. He's kind of the Buddha of the group, the one who's just trauma-free and happy to be there. But that is a very interesting thing to consider, the 4E series that's this jokey and lighthearted and fun. All these characters are dealing with heavy, heavy shit. And that's part of what brings them together as a chosen family, is that they've all been through stuff that a lot of people cannot really understand. And on the one hand, when they come together in the first movie, they're in a place where creating these bonds is really important in helping them grow. But most of them get to a point where they need to go off on their own and not depend on other people to really be fully developed. So again, these are some pretty mature ideas happening under all the dick jokes and innuendos. And I appreciate that. Now is time to talk about what I'm referring to as Marvelication. And this trilogy is a really good example of both the pros and cons of this approach that Marvel has taken to their media. On the one hand, when you have all these movies that are not just in the same universe, but are directly impacting each other, where characters are crossing over between films, where plot points from one series can be very affected by what happens in another series. If you're a hardcore fan who's watching all of the content, all of the media, that's really, really cool. And it leads to really powerful moments where different worlds collide. And it's really, really rewarding for the hardcore fans who are very invested. And I have to say also that historically speaking, this is something we really have not seen in Hollywood before. We've seen storytelling like this, I believe, in animes, in comic books appropriately enough, even in some video game series, but never in a major Hollywood series have we seen something take this kind of approach, and especially to the extent that Marvel did. And historically, it was very, very successful for them for a while, but over time, Marvel has been doing not quite as well these last few years. And again, it's because of these same things that made their movies so unique and successful initially. When you're a more casual fan, it is really frustrating when you're watching a movie and there's references being made that you don't understand, when things are happening that you know you're missing context, even if you're able to follow with like 90% of the plot, that still adds frustration when you know there's stuff going on that's just going a little over your head. And as far as this series go, part 3 is when this really came into effect. And I wasn't missing a lot in part 3. I understood the vast majority of it, but I was missing just enough to have some jarring moments that kind of annoyed me and took me out of it. And I also have to say, I had the benefit that I have at least seen the Avengers movies. It's been a long time, but I did see them, and so I knew that Gamora died, and I knew what happened with that plot point at least. I tried to watch these movies. It's just a standalone trilogy with zero knowledge of anything else happening in the extended Marvel Cinematic Universe. You'd probably be really confused and lost and frustrated when it comes to part 3. Watching this trilogy on its own, it's like reading a book, and you have chapter 1, and you have chapter 2, and it's a very natural continuation. And then you have chapter 7, and chapters 3, 4, 5, and 6 are just nowhere to be found. And all of a sudden, one of these main characters somehow died, but is apparently back, but it's not quite the same. And now these characters are referring to each other as siblings, when they weren't siblings before. What's going on? It's just a very frustrating feeling, and if I did not have the context of at least seeing those 2 Marvel movies, I probably would have turned this movie off early on. It would have been that jarring. And I mean, imagine if you try to watch part 3 without having seen the Avengers, without having any idea of what happened to Gamora. I cannot even imagine how frustrating and jarring and emotionally unsatisfying that would be. And the thing is, this is a problem that gets worse as time goes on, as more movies and more series are created. Like, when the very first Avengers movie came out, you only had to have seen a total of 5 movies before that to really understand and appreciate it. And those 5 movies had occasional, usually like in the credits, end scenes that reference each other a little bit, but were largely independent, you could watch on their own. By the time you got to Endgame, you needed to have seen 21 films to fully understand and appreciate and have the full context for it. 21 films. And we've been going for a while since Endgame. And at this point, they're even keeping the different TV series into it, and it's just so much to keep up with. And so not only is this a lot to keep up with when you're starting from the very beginning, like I did. I was in high school when the Iron Man 1 came out, so it was the perfect age to start out with these movies. But even for someone like me, it makes it hard to keep up with. But even worse, for newer fans who are like, yeah, I'd like to get into Marvel, I'd like to onboard onto this, it's so hard to do because you have so much content you have to go back and watch. Like, this is the main reason I don't get into anime series, is because I know I almost would always have so much content I would have to get through just to catch up on something. And then the old fans, we were all mostly teenagers when this movie started. Now we're in our 30s. A lot of us have jobs, a lot of us have kids, family, spouses. We don't have the same time and energy to keep up with these movies. And frankly, even for people like me, a lot of us, our tastes just kind of change over time. The movies that I got really excited about when I was 17, 18 are not the same movies I get excited about now at 34. So what Marvel has done is created a situation where it's harder and harder to retain that original fan base, while simultaneously making it harder and harder for new fans to onboard. And that is just not a recipe for long-term success. I'm not surprised that Marvel seems to be kind of falling apart these days. And frankly, if this upcoming like Doomsday, whatever they're doing, is not a huge success, I would not be surprised if in a couple years we see Marvel do some sort of hard reboot, because it's just so hard to keep up with at this point, and it does seem to be negatively affecting their output. And the worst thing of all to me is that this bleeds into the individual series. I've used this as kind of a case study for that. Movies 1 and movie 2, totally fine. Movie 3, I started having some questions and feeling kind of lost and feeling kind of left out. And I could apply this to virtually any series in Marvel. I'm sure if I went to try to watch just the Thor movies, or if I tried to go watch just the Ant-Man movies, I might get through one okay, but as I start getting into the sequels, I know there's going to be stuff I'm missing. And it's part of the reason why I fell off of Marvel a while ago, and why I haven't really gotten back into it, is even when a movie or series is coming out that looks interesting to me, I can't help but immediately think, well, how much of this am I even going to understand? How much stuff am I going to have to watch to have full context for this? How much research am I going to have to do to even know what I have to watch to understand this series? When there's so much content out there competing for my time and attention to focus on them, Marvel was making it harder and harder for me to want to dedicate any time or money to them when there are so many more movies and even series out there that are just so much easier to get into and demand a lot less from me in terms of time and dedication. So overall, I do like these movies quite a lot. I think they're funny, I think they're charming, and I think they have some surprisingly heavy bite. If you're really trying to dig into it and read between the lines, there's some pretty heavy stuff going on in here, and I appreciate that, especially in a movie that's really lighthearted on the surface. But this is a case where the original is such a classic, and the sequels, while being very worthy follow-ups, can't quite live up to it. You could watch just the first movie, and if you skip the rest of it, yeah, they're decent movies, but you won't be missing out on that much. The first movie's still definitely the best. So those are my thoughts on this series. For any of you who have watched all 4 of these videos, I truly thank and appreciate you. Make sure you like, subscribe, do all that stuff, and I'll see you next time. Until then, stay sane, stay human.